this hypercane get lifted up and dumped on top of some really startled mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, camels, llamas. And a lot of them get rolled up in shells and just washes clear across the state. And that's Florida geology. And so if you look at it, that's what you get. Like I say, you could find the same things I showed you in that picture anywhere in Florida. It's just that in Peace River's done a lot of the digging for you to get below the grass and, you know, all these other things. And it's public access and canoes, shallow, sandy water. So it's just an easy place to look. Well, you could find these things anywhere. And it's all that way across there. By the way, the shell pits, beautiful shells. We do the week-long program. We do fossils, and we also do shells and a trip to the beach and things like that, plus other kinds of activities. So it's a full-blown creation science short course. Well, that's the idea. And once again, it looks like what we see in God's world agrees with what we read in God's Word. Oh, by the way, yeah, one other thing. See, that's a good thing the transparency was there. You know, how old are these fossils? And this is kind of interesting, is that the Florida geologists talk about after the storm went through. I mean, that decimated, you know, the people and the animals. And, you know, there were few survivors left, you know, and around Ocala, some of the hills are, you know, almost 200, 250 feet high. The highest point in Florida, which is really in Alabama, is 346. Okay, so there were some people, you know, along the north that migrated back, but you know, a few big animals, a few hungry people, and so the State Museum was telling us the last of these large animals was killed off by my ancestors, the American Indians. And once in a while, you find spear points and arrowheads embedded in the bone. You can see where knives were used to scrape meat off the bone. And the State Museum says this happened about 4,000 years ago. That, you know, evolutionists hardly ever say 1,000. I was listening to a talk by one of the geologists. He was going down to a Caribbean island to dig up fossil alligators. And he kind of laughed at the audience. He said, you know, really, he says these fossils are only the ones that he was going to in the Caribbean. He says they're really only 1,500 years old. He said, I know they're supposed to be 10,000 to be a fossil. He says, but they've already paid my way. I'm going. And yeah, Mary's, I've probably told you this maybe in another context someplace. We were in a shell pit, you know, digging up stuff. And Mary found a clam that she identified. I mean, I would have just thought it was a clam. I probably wouldn't even have collected it because it still had some meat on it. I definitely wouldn't have collected it because it stunk. Okay, it still had some flesh on it, but she was sharp enough to know it was a Pliocene index clam. Well, for an evolutionist, that thing's supposed to be at least 2 million years old, maybe 5 million years old. Still has some meat on it. Okay, so she said, let's take it up to the State Museum. And I thought, I've asked for forgiveness since, that she misidentified the clam. I should have known better. So we go up there, and, you know, fellow identifies the clam. Yeah, you're right. This is a Pliocene index clam. It ought to be 2 million years old. You're right. It's still got some organic material on there. He says, these things are a real mystery, and pulled out a drawer full of them. Okay, it wasn't the first one he'd seen. It's just amazing. But they're back in the back room. They're not on display like they are in our museum. And one other time she was there doing, and we've donated specimens and stuff like that, and we keep our reports up to date. And she was in there talking to him and just glanced over at his desk. I don't even think she particularly noticed it. But he says, yeah, I know what you creationists think. He had a paperweight. It was a piece of coral, fossil coral, with a spark plug in it. Oh, but again, it's back in the back room, you know, it's not on display. So, but that 4,000, that really struck me as something that they're thinking that the last of these large animals in this final transition was about 4,000 years ago. And it all seems to be one continuous piece. You can't really separate the layers. They try to use Miocene, Pliocene, but there's no rhyme or reason to it. Okay, well, let me stop there and see if there are some questions or comments. And I could dismiss someone to get me a piece of cake while we're... Bill?
I'm curious, did God create saber-toothed tigers or are they mutated?
Okay, question, and you might have known, see, Bill had tried to do this. Did God create saber-toothed tigers? See, and then he even throws in a little kicker, or are they mutated? Okay. And in general, I think that's where predators came from. That all the, well, the Bible makes it clear that all the animals God created were vegetarian. And so the development of predators and scavengers, carnivores, came as a result of changes following man's sin. And the neat thing is, it's really easy to explain how a plant eater could mutate into a meat eater, because it's basically loss of characteristics. Plant eaters have very complex digestive systems for processing, cellulose embedded, wood embedded food, basically. And they have longer term digestion. They have extensive bacteria and microbes, to help them digest their plant food. So any mutation that caused a plant eater to lose part of its digestive system, it couldn't really handle plant material, and so it might wind up eating meat. And of course, animals will experiment. Shirley Strom, I think it was watching chimpanzees in Africa, and they ordinarily eat leaves and things like that and fruit. But this big old male chimpanzee chased a sick old Thompson's gazelle into a thicket and just beat it to death like a cat playing with a grasshopper. And blood all over its fingers. That's kind of neat, salty flavor. The female chimpanzees really liked the taste of blood, which meant the males went out looking for it. And so she thought she was observing the birth of the predatory habit. So it's mainly a change in behavior. And then it'll be fortified by loss mutations, loss of digestive structures, loss of enzymes to process the food, even if you could digest it, to convert it into other things. And so it's basically a downhill change. So you could explain evolutionists had a terrible time going the other way, to add all of the things you'd have to add to make a meat eater into a plant eater, but explaining the loss mutations. But the saber, and so basically probably not too much structural change in the bones or teeth. Even today, a lot of animals with sharp teeth, just eat plants. Grizzly bears, polar bears, 80 to 90% of their diet is just plants. Now they do occasionally supplement it with meat, but mostly it's plants. The panda has the same kind of teeth as a grizzly bear, and yet it just eats bamboo, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Fruit bats, look like vicious vampire bats, but they just eat fruit.